leave it up to the states. You can't really be half in and half out when it comes to abortion.
I mean, listen, you can claim to be, but the problem is that the majority of the country now actually doesn't really want that. They're in theory open to states' rights until what states want are no longer, unless it's no longer convenient to them. And
I think it is important, as I'm sure you all are aware, that even in very red states like Kansas and Kentucky, when there have been ballot referenda on abortions, they've not gone well for Republicans. So I think David has a point here that politically this is a loser, even if you leave it as a quote unquote states' issue.
It's gone so badly for Republicans that Florida voted to increase the threshold to pass a referenda to 60%. And the West Virginia governor prevented a referenda from even happening, right? Because even in a state like West Virginia, they don't think that 12-year-old rape victims should be forced to, have children, right? Which is a pretty reasonable stance for the average conservative to take. But I mean, unfortunately, this is one where the liberals were right. All the fear mongering of like, look, if Trump wins in 2016, if you sit this one out, the Supreme Court could be up for grabs. And it was pretty much a worst case scenario. He ended up getting the essentially the 2 appointments almost right off the jump within the first couple of years. But then RBG died, right? And so she dies literally a couple months before he leaves office. And well, that's what we end up with. We end up with a radical Supreme Court that strips the rights of women across the country, basically. So,
Stacks, I don't want to interrupt. Is there anything you want to add to that? Because I've got more to say.
Yeah, 100%. The only thing is that I find it so weird because I thought the Republicans made it clear that you can't elect a Supreme Court justice in the 4th year. That's what I thought.
That's true.
Rules. I'm confused.
That is true.
Are they hypocrites or?
I don't.
They found a way. It turns out.
Yeah, you got to understand. They had their fingers crossed when they said that. What they really meant was you can't confirm a judicial appointee to the Supreme Court during an election year during a waning gibbous moon the night before. Okay, that's the fine print that you didn't read, you moron. Obviously.
My fault.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. Also, when the president's black, you forgot that part.
Exactly.
That's honestly that's the real one right there. I am curious. So, Ikambo, you said, I didn't realize this, that Florida raised the threshold like Ohio tried to do instead of like just a simple majority to get a constitutional amendment, or excuse me, the referendum. It's got to go to 60%.
Yeah, so mega ironically, let's say they passed a referenda in Florida with 57% of the vote, which said that our new threshold is now 60%. So the threshold vote only required a majority to raise it. So kind of an ironic circumstance. But yeah, as far as I'm aware, now referendums in Florida require 60%. And to be fair, I mean, I think that this is one of those things, like it could actually play against the conservative cause in Florida, because if you look at the polling, like the abortion issue in Florida is right at 60%. Like it could actually cause a lot more people to be motivated to go out, because it's very clear that a majority in pretty much every state is going to vote for a significantly more liberalized, abortion regulatory state than the, basically what the Supreme Court has delved down in these old laws that are getting put in. But 60% is relatively questionable. So it could actually lead to more motivation for Democrats to come out and, liberal Republicans to come out and really, at the very least on that single issue, voice their support for, an abortion protection.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't realize, though, that the threshold was raised. Ohio Republicans tried to play dirty pool like that because they knew they were going to lose if it was down to a simple majority. But they kind of that referendum, it had to go to a referendum first for them to raise the threshold. Right. So people had to vote like, hey, do you want to vote to basically make it harder to pass constitutional amendments? And the public in Ohio were like, hell no, we don't. Let's just keep it a simple majority. So Republicans were like, fuck. And then they ended up losing the, ensuing referendum. And I think it's possible that even with a 60% threshold in Florida, that they could lose that as well, because abortion or pro-life, pro-forced birth policies in Florida are still not very popular.
True.
All right.
Yeah, exactly. It's just, I guess the unfortunate thing is that it's obviously a very anti-democratic thing to do, right? Because obviously it's unfortunately, like, just the way it works out, you can't be like, oh, well, for the threshold to increase the threshold to 60%, you should require 60%. Well, you only need a majority of the vote to raise. Like, in theory, you could raise the threshold to 99% with only 51% of people voting in favor of it, which is kind of ridiculous. But again, I think that could play against them, obviously, because you could always basically motivate more people to come out. And if you end up in an environment where 60+% of Floridians are voting to protect abortion, do you end up in an environment where 60+% of Floridians vote for that, but also they vote for Trump? I mean, maybe, right? But
but
that would be
it
pretty
seems
crazy.
less likely, right? Exactly. So I mean, that's why the Biden campaign, which I think they're probably overstating it, but I think they're right to try to put the fear of God in Republicans. They're saying that Florida's in play now.
Yeah.
I think that's probably an overstatement, but it's certainly more in play than it was.
And by the way, another reason to elect Democrats down ballot is the Attorney General of Arizona has already said she's not enforcing this law. She's like, I'm not going to prosecute anybody for basically. Understanding that the regulations are coming from, the 1860s or whenever this was passed. And this was an election, she ended up winning this election, the attorney general's race in Arizona, by like 500 votes.
Yeah,
It was
she
a
had,
very,
she had
very
a
close
250 vote margin, and that's where I almost wish Pisco was here, because it would be fun to see if he thinks that's a valid flex of separation of powers. Where okay, the Supreme Court in Arizona, it basically resurrects this draconian law, and so is it a perfectly valid use of separation of powers for the executive branch of Arizona to say, fine, but we're not going to enforce it, so it's effectively a dead letter? I think that's cool, but whatever. All right, we got to continue with the
Fair, valid.
Happened with a lot of folks on the MAGA side, and I think that this has the potential to backfire. Now, there's going to be so many other issues. I know Jen and Brian will talk about some of them, so I'm not ready to say this is going to be the defining issue in November, but it seems to be important.
And jump in anytime, guys, if you feel passionate about it. But Brian, I want to ask you, do you think that this is going to be a deciding issue, or maybe one deciding issue?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is the issue. To David's point, in terms of being able to straddle both sides, I think Donald Trump tried to do that, and it blew up in his face pretty badly, because on Monday he came out and said that he supports states' rights, and the veracity of that claim we can get into in a moment, because he doesn't. But regardless, he said it. He said he supports states' rights. And then what happened on Tuesday? The very next day, within 24 hours, a state came out and said that we're upholding an abortion ban from 1864. And so by virtue of saying that he supports states' rights, he now owns the issue that happened within 24 hours of him saying that. So there is no way to be able to straddle this issue, because when you claim that you want states' rights in an attempt to make yourself seem more moderate, what the states are actually doing completely undermines that, and it does it immediately.
But Cenk, he did say today, he was in Atlanta and he was getting off a plane, either getting off or getting on a plane, and he said to a reporter, I'm going to speak to the governor, we're going to fix that, take care of it immediately.
So look, he's trying to have his cake and eat it too, and he's now become a standard greasy politician. Oh, I'm so proud that I overturned Roe v. Wade. And at the same time, I don't mean it. I don't mean it. Yeah, women can have any rights that they want, as long as I get elected and I get rich and I get famous and all these things. So which one is it, Donald? You greasy politician. So he's so, and the Republicans' hypocrisy is obvious, as it is every single time. Lindsey Graham all of a sudden saying this is a moral issue that has nothing to do with geography. So let me get this right. When conservatives in this country were defending states' rights during slavery and Jim Crow for 100 years, that was not a moral issue? Or that was a moral issue? That was totally fine to be decided by geography. But all of a sudden, we're not talking about states' rights because he wants to make abortion illegal everywhere. Lindsey Graham does. And so Donald Trump, make up your mind. In the case of Arizona, real quick, look, the court decision is what it is. When you overturn Roe v. Wade, things like this happen. Old laws kick into place. I don't have much of an issue with that legally. Policy-wise, it's a disaster for the women of Arizona. And then in terms of politics, Joe Biden has never had a better gift. This puts Arizona back into play. Right. Now Biden has a pretty great chance of winning Arizona.
And for people like Carrie Lake, it's a disaster. For anybody who's on the ticket in Arizona as a Republican, I think it would be a disaster for them. So,
it's such a disaster, I'll point out. So I don't know if you guys saw it, but Carrie Lake actually not only went so far as to distance herself from this ruling.
She basically claimed she sort of said she was pro-choice without.
Yeah, right. She's like, listen, I value life, but I support a woman's right to, and without a complete, total lack of irony and self-awareness. But she actually issued a scripted ad for this to try to do it.
There was a funny viral, I think it was maybe a viral Reddit post. It kind of got popular on multiple platforms, but maybe it was a Twitter post as well, where some guy was like, look, I just think politics is too polarized. Take pro-life and pro-choice. Why can't we all just agree that it's up to the individuals involved to, make their decision and just leave it at that? And then somebody was like, that's called pro-choice, dumbass. Like, what do you think? What do you think that means? And that's kind of what Carrie Lake is trying to do. It's like, Carrie Lake, you are one of the craziest, Lauren Boebert level insane people the Republicans have running right now. No one believes you when you are trying to play the moderate. No one believes you. No one's
No,
going to take that
and
seriously.
she has tried so hard here lately. Did you see where she tried to extend the olive branch to Meghan McCain, the late Senator John McCain's daughter, after she and Donald Trump repeatedly insulted and denigrated McCain? And I think Meghan McCain replied with no peace, bitch, or something like that. And so she's in this thing that we talked about before, where Republicans are in a catch-22 of their own design, where in order to win the primary, they have to be as crazy and as far right as possible. But that decreases the likelihood that they win the general elections.
Right.
And they have to run twice the distance back in the opposite direction, to try to gain those independents and moderates. I agree. I don't think Carrie Lake is going to be able to pull it off. Now, Stacks, I know that you're a big Carrie Lake fan, being
Absolutely.
the men next wood. So I'm curious, do you think she and her ring light stand a chance of sufficiently moderating?
I mean, you make a good point, because I think that this idea that you have to be really extreme during the primaries and then moderate back in the generals, that's a pretty well-known phenomenon for both the Republican and the Democratic Party. But the thing is that with the Republican Party has just spiraled into such extremism that is like sort of disconnected from the rest of like where the rest of America is, that in order to sort of the moment you start tapping into that extremism, you just become untenable to the rest of everyone.
Yeah, hopefully. I mean, I think Ruben Gallego is leading in most of the polls. I don't think that's changed. So hopefully his lead maintains.